Okay, let's just dive right into it. There is this absolutely bizarre housing paradox unfolding right now in Canada. We're looking at a situation where the fundamental rules of supply and demand, the stuff you learn in Econ 101, seem to have just completely broken down. And to fix it, the government is floating this massive billion-dollar proposal. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the whole shebang: the empty homes, the political firestorms, and the really hidden financial machinery running the Canadian real estate market.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, we've got to look at this number, 4,376. As of May 2026, that is exactly how many completely finished condos are just sitting there, utterly empty in Metro Vancouver. We're talking brand new, unabsorbed units with nobody living in them. And honestly, what makes that number truly staggering is that it's a 76% jump from just 1 year ago. That's a massive surge of empty inventory right in the middle of one of the most famously expensive housing markets on the planet.
And what's wild is how concentrated this glut actually is. If you look at all the unsold, unabsorbed apartment units in the entire province of British Columbia, 3/4 of them, 75%, are clustered right there in the Metro Vancouver area. The rest of the province splits the remaining 25%. So we're not just looking at a general, widespread housing issue. This is a highly localized mountain of empty concrete sitting right in a city that is practically begging for affordable homes.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question, or I guess the multi-billion-dollar question. If housing supply is up this much, why on earth aren't the prices dropping? Basic economics tells us that when thousands of empty units flood the market, prices should naturally crash to meet demand, right? But they haven't. Everyday people are still completely priced out, and those condos are still sitting empty. So why exactly isn't the market correcting itself?
Well, let's get into Section 1, the empty condo paradox.
So despite all of this massive new supply, condo prices in the area have only dipped by what? Maybe 10%? Why? Well, it's because developers are basically stuck in a standoff. With higher interest rates and weaker buyer demand, they absolutely refuse to sell these empty units at a loss. But here's the catch. Those empty units don't just innocently sit there. They really spook unsettled lenders and investors. And when lenders get spooked, they halt funding for new construction. The cranes stop moving. So ironically, future scarcity is artificially maintained. The whole market basically freezes in place, just holding its breath and waiting for prices to go back up so developers can finally make their profit.
This brings us to Section 2, the government conversion plan.
To try and break this massive stalemate, Prime Minister Mark Carney and BC Premier David Eby have proposed this unprecedented three-step initiative. The goal? Take these empty units and immediately turn them into occupied, affordable homes. Step 1, they want to pinpoint roughly 2,200 vacant condo units in priority growth areas. Step 2, the government would step in, leverage some innovative financing, and bulk purchase these distressed units from the developers at a discount. And finally, Step 3, instead of just dumping them back on the open market, they'd offer these units directly to Canadians using a rent-to-own framework.
Now, the scale of this intervention is quite frankly massive. The total potential spending to scoop up these empty units is estimated at a cool $1.45 billion. Under this proposal, the federal government would put up 10% of that funding, and the British Columbia provincial government would be left footing the rest of the bill.
But a really key pillar of this plan is how they actually distribute the homes. These aren't going to be your standard rentals. The whole goal rests on a rent-to-own structure. Essentially, tenants will rent the property, but a chunk of their monthly payments will actually be saved toward a future down payment to purchase that exact same home. It's specifically tailored to support aspiring homebuyers. You know, the welder, the waitress, the local small business owner, the folks who are currently totally priced out of saving for a massive down payment because they're stuck paying exorbitant rent.
But, as you might expect, Section 3, the Bailout Backlash.
Almost immediately after this was announced, it ignited a total political firestorm. We're looking at two completely opposing views of the exact same policy. On the left side of the aisle, it's being championed as a huge public benefit, rapidly turning empty concrete into actual homes for families by scooping up distressed assets at a discount. But on the right side, it's being slammed as a straight-up developer bailout. Critics argue it forces taxpayers to absorb the financial losses of developers who just made bad bets while artificially propping up housing prices instead of letting them fall naturally.
Let's look impartially at the government's defense here. Prime Minister Carney explicitly denies that developers even asked for this program. Their argument is that this is purely an opportunistic move, a way to buy distressed real estate at a discount for the greater public good. The government maintains that their focus is 100% on the end user, the family that finally gets to move into an affordable home. And they insist that developers are still going to have to take painful losses on these sales.
Conversely, the federal opposition is pushing back on that logic, hard. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre argues that taxpayers are essentially being forced to bid against themselves. His stance is pretty straightforward. Developers inflated the market into a massive bubble, the bubble burst, and now the government is using tax dollars to bail out developer friends rather than forcing them to swallow the losses they created. Poilievre's innovative solution? Just let the prices drop organically.
And BC conservatives are mirroring that exact same sentiment at the provincial level. Housing critic Linda Hepner argues that natural market forces, not taxpayer-funded government intervention, should dictate prices. And the really deep concern here is all about moral hazard. Think about it. If the government steps in to buy empty condos now, developers are heavily incentivized to never lower their prices in the future. They'll know a taxpayer bailout is always a backup option if they just hold out long enough.
All right, let's move to Section 4, the expert verdict.
To find the actual nuance between these political extremes, we have to look at the independent housing experts. Mike Moffat from the University of Ottawa makes a great point. He emphasizes that the success of this entire plan hinges on one piece of undiscovered math: exactly how big is that bulk discount? Because if the government pays near-peak market prices for these condos, developers get a multi-billion-dollar windfall, and yeah, it is undeniably a bailout. But if the government holds their feet to the fire and forces a steep, painful discount to unload that inventory, then it genuinely could be a win-win for public affordable housing.
Meanwhile, Andy Yan over at Simon Fraser University asks a really tricky practical question. Imagine for a second you're an everyday person who somehow managed to scrape together enough cash to buy a condo at full market price. What happens to your property value when the government swoops in and bulk buys the empty unit literally right next door to you at a massive discount? When you intervene in a hyper-localized market like this, it creates some incredibly complex ripple effects for regular homeowners.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, the bigger housing picture.
So what's the root cause of all this? The answer lies in the financialization of housing. Basic supply and demand is just fundamentally broken here because our housing market is acting way more like a carefully managed stock portfolio than, a basic human necessity. Housing is morphed into this financial playground where oversupply is carefully throttled to ensure aggregate prices just keep trending upward over time. It's designed to maximize profits for investors rather than ensuring everyone actually has a roof over their head.
And this is baked right into the very structure of the nation's real estate. Canada basically operates on a two-tier housing system. Tier 1 is the dominant market. It's speculative, profit-driven, and it makes up a massive 96.5% of all housing. Tier 2 is the non-market sector, your social or affordable housing. But at just 3.5% market share, it is simply far too tiny to actually anchor or lower overall market prices. So even huge government interventions, like buying 2,200 condos, ultimately just operate within the rules of that dominant 96.5%, rather than actually challenging the system itself.
And guys, this is the truly terrifying underlying reality that policymakers are facing right now. Obviously, everyone wants affordable housing, but heavily deflating the housing bubble to achieve true affordability would simultaneously vaporize the retirement savings and equity of millions of everyday Canadians. If prices actually drop by 40 or 50%, hundreds of thousands of households go totally underwater on their mortgages, potentially triggering a years-long economic recession. Financialized housing has literally become a load-bearing pillar of the entire Canadian economy.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder at the end of our explainer. We are locked in this crazy cycle where we desperately want homes to be cheap to buy, but we absolutely need them to remain expensive to protect our collective wealth. Can any government, regardless of their political stripe, actually make housing affordable if the entire national economy relies on it staying expensive? Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.